David in Hershey, Pennsylvania, has some thoughts that he would like to share about America First. You want to go back to what we were talking about? I saw how today the Anti-Defamation League called on Donald Trump to stop using the phrase America First because of its anti-Semitic history that I laid out yesterday in some detail with Lamar. David, if you're on the air.
I'm there. I wanted to ask you about the anti-Semitism link, but let me just run by a couple of things about America First. Mm-hmm. America First was led by Senator Nye, who chaired the Senate Commission on the Causes of World War I.
Right.
And all that was totally valid for the neo-isolationists of the 40s, you know?
Well, of the 30s, of the late, the mid to late 30s, yes.
Right, and staying out of World War II until the Japs hit us.
Yep.
But anyway, going back to World War I, your historian yesterday talked about the military-industrial complex at that time, mm-hmm. but I didn't hear a relationship with the banksters. Now, here's the numbers. In 1917, early 1970, mm-hmm. UK was into us for $4.6 billion, France was into us for $4 billion, and Russia was into the three of us for $16 billion.
And that was real money back then. Did anything
relate to GNP? We were making 35 billion GNP in 1914, and by 1917 we were up to 60 billion.
Yeah.
So you're talking like 15% of the action, you know?
Right. So, how much of that had to do with the Lend-Lease program, or had none of it have to do with it? I'm not that familiar with that era of our history, frankly.
We didn't have a Lend-Lease back then.
Okay.
Back then, everybody was on the gold standard, and we'd already sucked out. England gave us $300 million in gold because if you had a balance of payment problem,
right,
you had to make it up with gold in those days.
Right.
So the only alternative to shipping us gold was to borrow money from us,
right,
to pay the balance of payments problems.
Mm-hmm.
So we go into that war, you know, it was totally a bankster thing when you think about it. I mean, the French and British, the cause of the war was more ran out of indigenous people to steal land from, so they had to...
We're talking about World War I now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
But now the link to anti-Semitism is, you know, the original sin against capitalists and banksters is you nationalize or don't pay the debts, right?
Right.
Nothing is worse. Well, the Tsarist Russia was into the big three for $16 billion.
Which was probably in the neighborhood of their GDP at that time.
Right. And 4 of it was UK.
Mm.
Later, we would send troops against the Bolsheviks in 1920. All 3 of us. Mm. France, England, and U.S. Most people don't realize we had troops in Russia in 1920.
I didn't know that.
But anyway, going back to the Jewish relationship, Trotsky and Lenin were both atheists, but Trotsky's parents were Jewish, and Lenin's grandparents on one side were Jewish, and the German Communist Party was led by Rosa Luxemburg, who was a Jew, who they murdered in 1919. Mm-hmm. So, you know, modern history talks about, it's all because of the Jewish banksters. I think, and I don't know what you think, but I was going to ask you, I think it's more related to the leftist tendencies / communist socialists of what they looked at as from a Jewish source, you know?
I think not. You know, would you say that, you know, America was a WASP conspiracy? You know, because virtually all of the founding fathers were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, Catholics and Jews were largely excluded, and of course people of color and women. Some part of their identity, as it were, of identity politics might have colored things, but I get real uncomfortable with those, you know, going down those roads. I don't see it, David. I don't see it. I think that people are operating on their, you know, in their economic self-interest or their national self-interest, and when those two things conflict, that's when you sort out the genuine statesmen and women from the the hacks, basically, and I've seen the anti-Semitic literature about World War I. It was it was all over in Germany, in the 30s, of course, and the late 20s, and Fritz von Liebenfels was one of the guys who inspired Hitler and wrote about this stuff extensively, and I've read his stuff in both English and German. And
so you think it was more just anti-Semitism in general?
I think what they were doing is they would identify a few people who were Jewish. I mean, you get lots of people who were Catholics, who were Protestants, who were atheists, who were none of the above, who whatever. Or gee, it must be the Jewish conspiracy because this guy's grandparents were Jewish. No, I don't. This is how this corrosive, cancerous anti-Semitism and other forms of bigotry propagate themselves, is with these kinds of conspiracy theories. This is where where you get into here's what so and so was doing because they were fill in the blank, the Catholics. I mean, there was all this paranoia about the Catholics, particularly in the state of Massachusetts in the late part of the 1900s and the early 20th century. To the point that an entire political party, the Know Nothing Party, they called themselves. It was actually the American Progress Party or something like that. I forget the name of it now, but I wrote about it in Thom Hartmann's Complete Guide to ADHD, actually, because Horace Mann came into that party in Massachusetts in the 1880s and pitched the first public schools as a way of creating good factory workers and good people for the army, making people compliant, and to break the back of the Catholics in Boston, and who were creating their own schools. And he was like, no, we're going to take them out of these Catholic schools or this homeschooling, and we're going to do state schooling, and it's going to be absent of religion, and we're going to de-Catholicize Boston. And so, I mean, name your religion, and I can show you where there was a conspiracy theory around that religion that, in all probability, was not based in any reality. So go ahead, Dave.
Maybe, but the brown shirts did go after the trade union, communists, and socialists first in Germany.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Before they actually broadened it out to.
Although Hitler had started talking about the Jews. I mean, keep in mind, read Mein Kampf. It's
I have Mein Kampf.
He talks in particular about there's a chapter in Mein Kampf that one of my earliest producers on this program back in 2003. He went by the screen name of Zen Pickle. I don't know if he wants his name out there now. Wrote, and in fact, you can probably still find it on one of my old websites or published someplace. Where, in fact, I think it is something. The title of it was something like Mein Kampf rewritten by Ann Coulter. And what he did was he took about 10 or 12 paragraphs out of one of the chapters of Mein Kampf where Hitler's talking about the Jews, and simply replaced the word Jew with the word liberal. And it read like Ann Coulter. I mean, we're not just Ann Coulter, not to pick on her specifically, but it read like something that you'd find on WorldNet Daily, on one of the hardcore right-wing sites. And it was just, it was just kind of generic trashing, only he was specifically pointing it at Jews. And that spread there was such a receptive audience for that in Europe at the time, because Europe was going through all these crises. They just had World War I. They were having famines. They were having disease. You had the Spanish flu. You had another economic crash. And it's like, we got to blame it on somebody. Who do we blame it? Oh, let's blame it on the Jews. It's got to be the Jewish bankers. It wasn't. David, thank you for the call.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.